Ea, she, ish. And so, in celebration, it ish. Welcome to this moment. As we sit here in this room, lovingly referred to as the main function room of this, the Ascended Master School in Zeeland, but otherwise metaphysically linked to that which is known as the Imzaia auditorium, where indeed this transmission is flowing from right now. And as this space fills up with the infinities of permanent presence, and as the arrival of your permanent brothers and sisters begins to pour out of you, alongside with me and alongside with you, I sit here and greet you. I am Solarys of Achaenaic service and Achaenaic domain, in creatorship, connected to you all in infinity. As we start this message today, I thought it good to get the technical side out of the way first, for there is a lot to share, both on that level and on many other levels indeed. Yes, this so-called solstice message does carry a message about this solstice, and yet it brings it to a point that by definition this solstice period, this 21st of December 2024 that you have now journeyed through, can be and should be labeled indeed the final solstice. And yet, as those here in this room can observe on this message board, beyond the scope of this screen, I will label today's message, "It is always solstice somewhere." And indeed, while this does refer to your jokingly stated observations such as, it is always 6 o'clock somewhere, it is always happy hour somewhere, allowing you to partake in your drinking rituals at times when it is inappropriate to invoke such rituals. I label today's message, it is always solstice somewhere, in that context. But I label it in another, much more significant way as well. Of course, for those that have been on this recent journey into infinometry, the communication of which started already early this year in April with the beloved Adamus, and even before that, near the end of the previous year with the beloved Ikara. The information stream truly started in earnest when the Cosmic 12 on November 1st of this year announced to you the arrival of the final portal and what this would mean, or what it does mean. We also said at that time that you would notice that it would be tough to let go of your rituals, your patterns, your cycles, your repetition in this physical landscape of time and space. And so it of course unfolded, which was no surprise, that many, if not mostly all out there, after the month of November was past and you entered into the month of December, were happy and ready to celebrate the journey through the 12-12 portal. And a little bit later, yesterday in fact, to celebrate and give enormous and extensively fractalized meanings, as you do, to the significance of this year's solstice. Many spoke of transformation, of introspection and reflection, as you always do when you listen to these repetitive voices and teachers whose entire significance and continued existence is extremely dependent on keeping you in these loops, of course, much like in your world the oil industry hates to let go of their monopoly as new technologies emerge that are much less, or could be much less, impactful, as it were. So is it with the world of the New Age and the business of spirituality, as you will encounter almost everywhere voices that will significantly want to hold on to these old loops. And so it was with the 12-12 and with the arrival of this year's solstice. And so it will be with the arrival of every month's portal and various portals in that month even, if you were to believe your social media streams that seem to be occurring for all of you throughout these years. And that brings us to a very important point. It brings us to the point of the concept of meaning. It goes, of course, without saying, as the work that has come before this moment has taught you, that you and your consciousness are the bringers of meaning to your world. As it goes in these holographic training grounds where you dim your experience of consciousness to the level of what you call human, and you observe the world through your senses, as it goes in these places, it will not surprise you that if you look back to earlier waveforms of the expression of this Echuraya, and you were to look back to the days of the caveman and woman, or is it cave being these days? Who knows? That when you look back to those times, thrown into this type of adventure, much like 20 years ago or so, it was still popular for young children to be picked up in the middle of the night and dumped in a forest somewhere where they, without any guidance, light, or any other form of support, had to make their way back to an agreed upon place, of course constantly with an out of sight but present eye of adults, so that the entire experience was safe. This used to be a thing. And this is not really that different from the experiences that you call these Echurayas, of course. But all the way back in those waveform states that you would think of as the caveman time, you would look up at the stars as you sat around your fires, and you would begin to define through story mainly, through ritual and dance, and ultimately also through the expression in music and instruments and that sort of thing. And over time, you brought meaning to the randomness of those stars, and as you do with your consciousness and also with your mind, you gave form and shapes to the connections of these stars and planets and their movements. And you manifested the tales of the Aquarius, of the Gemini, of the Pisces, and all these other shapes and forms that you chose to identify. A way, you could say, to subconsciously reach out to the truth from whence you came and the origins, your homelands of Honomeia, in which you entered these exercises and dimmed your consciousness. A spark, a waking flame, if you will, through which identification with physical objects, even as far away as stars and planets, could happen. And so you gave meaning to these things. It is no different these days as I believe has recently been shared already, as you invented your lenses to either in the macro look far, far away into space, or in the micro look deep, deep within the tissues of the body. And as has been shared recently, that which you went looking for, which first were ideas about how things could be working, theories about how things could be, that initially ended up on your imaging stations through these lenses, in vague pictures that could mean almost anything, vague blobs, that through the lens of science and other observations, people throughout the generations kept saying, oh yes, it must be like this, it must be like that. And as the new generations of humans kept thinking about this, new generations of lenses came in, and you looked more refined and you looked deeper, and you said, oh yes, all these theories were wrong, but that one was right because this is what we're seeing. Not realizing, of course, the Ba principle, that the inner world and the outer world are one, and that through the act of continuous observation and reflection, you ended up simply with a sharp image, a consensus of the way you all agreed things were. And so you saw the birth of orbits and all of these things in physics, the time-space continuum itself, relativity theory, what have you. And as you looked deeper and deeper into the body, where previously those thinkers that were thinking about these things had already come up with the idea of the so-called flow of the juices, the humors, which eventually solidified in the idea of organs. And as the cutting open began in the surgical theaters in the 19th and 18th centuries, for instance, and even before that, the refining of energy flows of a light body, which really was everything that we've always told you about it. But as you went deeper into the world of matter, into the world of physics, you eventually manifested as a collective consciousness the idea of the organs, the idea of the blood flow, and all of these things as you refined and sharpened the image and eventually got back reflected at you the consensus reality that you all agreed upon. And as it was with these sciences, so it was in the more metaphysical reflections. And as you began to combine these things and you began to see also again upon agreement the tilting of the earth, creating the precession, and ultimately also creating the coming and going of the orbit of the earth around the sun, and how in its own tilt it influenced your perception of the sun, all due to the generation of consensus reality, and also, of course, the coming out of balance of your consciousness within your reality. Because as these ideas, really, truly burdens and prisms of thought and geometry, as you have been recently taught, as these ideas burdened you down, dimmed you down, you left the concept of infinity for the circular, and eventually the circular for the square, and you burdened yourself into the manifestation of an imbalance between yourself and the so-called speed of light, consciousness and light expressed out of balance, causing the complexity of the physical laws of science, causing the complexity to crystallize in such things as the organs that I have just explained, but also the tilting of the planet and the precession and the equinoxes, therefore, and the solstices. And as you dove deeper into this world of physicality and matter, the need for meaning in reflection and retrospection of the homelands of Hanumeya became greater. So that meaning was placed by the human species on the things it expressed around it. In other words, the reality of physical matter and the laws of physics itself. And so it began to be important how many journeys around the sun you had had. And so that became a finite thing. Congratulations. And so it became important to observe the stars in reflection to the events on Earth, not seeing that they are responding to the events within you. And so all of these things grew in meaning, and therefore also in ritual. But that is the world of geometry, of time and space, and as it has been explained, the world of Lavat. You recently took a major step up and outward, out of this exercise known as an Ekuraya, from the level of geometry to the level of infinometry. And believe me when I say that when Ra recently or shortly will commence, you will be prepared to take yet several more steps to the full activation and return of Creator consciousness and the Creator self and whole, of course. But as you have now taken this very important first step from the lands of geometry into the lands of infinometry, this recent solstice portal, of course everything is a portal right now at every moment in time, as you have been told, as you have experienced and witnessed for yourselves in the meantime. But as this solstice portal recently was reached, that I have labeled now the final solstice, I labeled it such because in the significance of the journey from geometry to infinometry that began in earnest November 1st with several zeniths afterwards, including the 11-11 one. From that point onward to the point where you have arrived now, this duration in space, this distance in time, and mainly due to your expression and your progression of your experiences, can now be safely labeled as having successfully been completed. So, the significance of meaning that you can give to this solstice, this final solstice, is the final unlocking of every level of the spectrum of consciousness from the geometrical lens, and the final recoupling and reactivation of all levels of consciousness as it can express itself here to the Lin point perspective, and therefore the perspective of infinometry. That is now a solid base, a plateau through which every experiencer in this Echorrhea can no longer crash through, fall through. And with the arrival indeed of today, the 22nd, the recoupling is complete. This holds much meaning, and it leads me to my second interpretation, to my chosen title of It is Always Solstice Somewhere. To explain this, I must thoroughly refer you back to the recent 3 presentations by the beloved Isis of ancient Egypt, and her exercise known as the Queen's Chamber, and what she has attempted to explain to you there. For those of you familiar with Egyptian hieroglyphics, and when I say familiar, I do not mean on a university skill level, I mean familiar with their presence on Earth like all of you are, it probably isn't difficult to pull up an image, don't reach for your phones, to pull up an image within yourself for once, of hieroglyphs that you have seen of ancient Egyptian figures, often, of course, with the deity heads. Ancient Egyptian figures who are depicted as having a disc above them, above their heads. In some cases, this disc is made even more clear by having a radiance come off of it. And in some cases, this disc is represented in a type of chalice going into the crown of the head. Now, these depictions are of beings that are in a state of permanence and in a state of reciprocity. Beings such as Isis herself and many others during her days that had undertaken this journey through the Queen's Chamber, as it has been explained to you all, successfully. In a recent conversation between the beloved Barak, the Padasanka over there, and the beloved the Palau Tseson, as the beloved Barak was explaining his experiences of the Queen's Chamber exercise, he spoke of, after the effect of the spiral of golden light becoming active, an awareness occurring of what could be labeled, of course, the golden cloud portal. But the awareness was more of a type of golden light above the head, compelling you to look up. But a golden light which, as the Palau Tse explained, can easily be described as sunshine. Imagine a beautiful day in a beautiful place, sunshine everywhere, that feeling on top of your head. As you are not directly looking into the sun, but as you feel its presence, you can observe its light. That feeling. And it led the Palau Tse into a tale of Egypt, of course in reference to the recent sharings by beloved Isis of ancient Egypt. Now remember that in those days, the pyramids and these types of structures were extremely activated, allowing for a manifestation, if you will, of multiple levels of the Ekuraya occurring in the same frequency, in the same field. For practical purposes, this means that every level of expression of consciousness was allowed and able to interact with one another. To make it even more practical, imagine walking through Egypt on a rainy and stormy afternoon. Hail, dark clouds, rain and wind hitting you in the face. And down the road, there's Isis or someone like that who's walking down the road, approaching you. And imagine that you are in a state of significant, dense, third-dimensional consciousness, believing, for instance, even though you know the theories, that the rain is just an effect of an external world, of the weather, and therefore you're walking through a storm. But from the perspective of the enlightened, the awakened, having gone through the death and the rebirth that is the Queen's chamber, as she approaches, you seem to see a thin sort of layer around her, maybe 5-10 centimeters wide, as though she is in a bit of a cutout in your modern age of cinema, placed with a green screen, if you will, behind her in such a way that it appears that you can look right past her, and instead of seeing the storm that is affecting you, you see the same landscape, sunny, calm, peaceful, beautiful, harmonious and balanced. You see that her body, her hair, does not seem to be affected by the rain and by the wind, is not getting wet, is not getting messy. And it feels to you as though you could almost reach your hand right past her and step right into this other version of reality. That is the result of the Queen's chamber. In other words, while you are walking around in this belief system of a third density reality, waiting for solstice to happen in 3 days, in a month, waiting for this and for that to manifest in your external reality as you are witnessing the procession and all of that. For the likes of those such as Isis, it is always solstice. It is always the high point of the day. It is always the zenith of the sun and of the sun, of the beauty of creation, of the flow of love and joy and freedom. And you don't only find this when looking through historical archives such as Egyptian hieroglyphs, these depictions. You can find them in the description of metaphysical works, to name but one, the masters of the Far East, similar descriptions. But where you really need to look for them is right here and now, within you. Because the state I am describing here and now is the state that is accessible to you here and now. It is always solstice somewhere. And it is right there in this reality that I'm describing that is eternally present and eternally accessible to you. As it was in the days of ancient Egypt and in many other places and times on earth, some of which you still have some form of record of, but often in mythology, so it is now again. And that is why I am calling this piece what I have called it, and why I am calling this particular solstice the final one. Now, of course, there is no judgment here on anyone that chooses to celebrate these rituals, chooses to place their consciousness within it, for a variety and plethora of reasons, no doubt, often in very kind considerations and service-based reasons. But the truth is that that very meaning that you have placed upon these things, these rituals, these cycles that kept you going, that kept you connected and reminded in a way of the true home-based reality, have now become meaningless. And therefore, to those that hear this call, you are invited to place your meaning where it belongs. Not in the field of time and space and its cyclical movement, not in the rituals that have seemed so important to you, but in the truth of your existence. And on the journey towards the return of your own consciousness to the Creator whole. But Solarys, someone asks, has it all then just become meaningless? All of this, the world? No. No, beloved, it has not. But let me say this. If you look for a place to park your meaning, your focus in this reality, in the field of time and space, then forgo the cyclical, forgo the ritualistic, and return to the moment. What does that mean? It means that if you want to find meaning in this world, then place it in compassion. Place it in love of your fellow being, love of the animal kingdom, love of the insect realm, even the ones that bite, love in the kingdom of the world of flora, Gaia's creation, and take care in compassion for all of these things, as it should have been proven to you now. All of these expressions of consciousness, easily considered significant perhaps to most when it is human to human, and as you go lower into the world of pets, also still very significant. General animal kingdom, harder to remain significant when you think about some intensities that are happening there, and further away for most. Into the world of the insects, hardly any significance. Many considering these beings not even worthy of their service and assistance, and just swap them, kill them, destroy them. Again, no judgment. But I believe for all of you listening to me right now, you have already witnessed a tremendous change there in how you deal with literally every form of life, and how your compassion and your care and your consciousness and your kindness is beginning to come to the fore, to the surface, and that where you once saw critters and monsters and horrors, you are now seeing the Creator simply connecting back to you in all of your forms and shapes and costumes, ever so splendid. Place your meaning there. On all of these things, and of this act of caretaking for all of these things, for this is where you will enter into the state of Da. Your meaning is no longer needed in the ritualistic and in the repetitive and in the cyclical, for you have in earnest begun the walk home. And as this year has proven, the smallest of beings, in this case, the 9-year-long consciousness expression of a golden retriever called Luke, can change everything. Every expression, every journey of every being on every level of reality holds the same constant and balanced importance than everything else. Place your meaning there, if it must be placed within this density. It will not surprise you when I tell you that I, Solarys, look forward with great excitement and joy, therefore, and great love to the following steps that are now ahead. What is coming with the return of beloved Ra, as you bring this year to a close and open the theater of 2025, that will become more obvious than it ever has been. So, beloveds, all I can say is consider these things, contemplate these things, and make the choices that feel right to you and to the one whole, and to the whole one. For that is all there is. And that is the being and the state of beingness to which you now have returned and have access to. The state of the whole one. For some of you, it may seem like a far-fetched story, this tale I shared earlier of the integration of various realities after the activation of the Queen's Chamber, but I am aware as I sit here delivering this message in this moment that there are those already out there listening to this that are now saying, oh, that's what that was. That's why I wasn't affected by this or this. That's why this other person seemed to talk to me about an entirely different set of circumstances during our meeting. It begins to make sense now. And that is indeed, beloveds, the great promise of where you are now and what is ahead, that it will once again make sense. Enjoy your continued exploration of this plateau of infinometry that we have now reached, and prepare, because we will not be hanging around here that long. The climb and the journey continues. I am in love with you. I am in joy with you. And together we are in freedom. I am Solarys of Akenaic creation, Akenaic domain, in service to the whole one, always. And so it is.